Verse 116. I am Mahamati, Blessed One, and am well versed in the Mahayana. I wish to ask 108 questions of thee, who art most eloquent. This verse comes as a bit of a shock. I had to double check to make sure it was correct. This verse appears at the beginning of the second chapter of the Lankavatara Sutra, and it begins with Mahamati asking 108 questions of the Buddha. And since chapter 9 of the Lankavatara Sutra is called the verse summary, perhaps we can assume that the first 115 verses are a summary of the first chapter. They're not an obvious summary, but perhaps they're a summary of the message of the first chapter. Anyway, it seems strange that the last few verses have taken us to the loftiest appreciation of enlightenment practice, and now we come down with a bit of a clunk to these 108 questions of Mahamati. Again, this is how enlightenment practice is. We are right with it at one point, and then the mind comes in, and the mind here is represented by all these questions. In chapter 2 of the text, the Buddha answers each of these questions. Although according to Professor Suzuki's notes, there's not quite 108 questions, and the Buddha's answers don't quite correlate to all of Mahamati's questions. But thankfully, we don't have to worry too much about what these questions were. If you want, you can read them from the text. But they're not particularly helpful. And here in the verse summary, they get bypassed. They get bypassed in verse 118. Before we get there, here's verse 117. Hearing his words, the Buddha, the best knower of the world, looking over the whole assembly, spoke to the son of the Sugata thus. So the Buddha here is described as the best knower of the world. The Buddha understands what's going on, truly understands what's going on. Mahamati here is referred to as the son of the Sugata. Previously he was referred to as the son of the Buddha. This is obviously in a metaphorical sense. The Sugata is one of the epithets of the Buddha. It means well gone, well gone. Some interpretations add a blissful component to this, as if he's blissfully well gone. But I don't think we need to bring bliss into it. It's a bit superfluous. Sugata means well gone. It means well gone from conventional understanding. It means established in suchness, established in that which is beyond all words and ideas. It means established in how things really are. So the Buddha, the Sugata, answered thus. Verse 118. The Sankha and the Vaiseshika philosophers teach birth from a being or from a non-being. All that are proclaimed by them are the inexplicables. So the Buddha is summing up all of Mahamati's questions into these two categories. Categories of the Sankha and Vaiseshika philosophers. Now if you look into this, you'll find that the Sankha, it's spelled here as Sankha, but it's the same as the Samkhya school of Hindu philosophy. You'll find that the Samkhya and the Vaiseshika schools of philosophy were two of 6 traditional schools. And why are these 2 mentioned? Well, perhaps because they were prominent at the time. They would have both been in ascendance at the time of the composition of the Lankavatara Sutra. But before I look into them, let's be quite clear why we're looking into them and the significance of the Buddha's answer. The greatest obstacle to enlightenment is our own understanding. It can be our own understanding about spirituality, or it's our own understanding about the nature of ourselves and the nature of the world. These are the 2 obstacles to enlightenment. It's our mindset which prevents us from realizing what is. Enlightenment isn't some faraway goal. It isn't some peak, some Olympian peak or Himalayan peak that we have to climb arduously to reach. Enlightenment is laid out in front of us, but we can't see it. We are in the habit of ignorance. We're in the habit of unenlightenment. And this isn't to do with our moral imperfections. This isn't to do with being bad people, because bad people can get enlightened too. It's to do with our mindset. It's to do with our habitual misunderstanding. It's a misunderstanding which continues from generation to generation. It's a misunderstanding which has got nothing to do with intelligence. In fact, it's intelligent people which seem to be more virulently blind to how things are. And the Sankha and the Vaiseshika philosophies represent these 2 areas in which we are completely blind. And there are 2 areas which can lead to enlightenment. One is the nature of ourselves, and the other is the nature of the world. The Samkhya philosophy says that we have this immortal soul which gets reborn from one life to the next. It's an immortal, unchanging soul. The curious thing is, it's unique to each one of us. We each have our own. That's it. So the Samkhya philosophy here refers to notions of the individual. And Vaiseshika was the original atomic understanding of the world. It's very clever. It realized that things can be broken down only to a finite level, and there must be a basic atomic structure. This is what the Vaiseshika has realized. Its understanding is quite scientific in the sense that it assumes the existence of an external world out there. The Buddha says that they both teach birth from a being or from a non-being. Well, I suppose that being could be the soul, which is known as the Purusha, which gets born again and again. It should be birth from a being. Or from non-being. We can take this as the normal scientific understanding. It arises from this basic atomic structure of the world. Although I think there's a bit more to it than this. There were 2 wrong views which the Buddha warned against. These are known as eternalism and annihilationism or nihilism. Eternalism means the understanding that things just continue, that death is not the end. There's this ongoing process. And nihilism or annihilationism is the idea that it all ends at death. So I think this is actually what it's referring to here, are these two understandings. And the Buddha denied both of them. He said both these understandings inhibit enlightenment. And he spoke of his teaching as a middle way between these two extremes, eternalism on the one hand and nihilism on the other. I think we could understand this in terms of ordinary religion and scientific understanding. We don't want to go for either of them. So here the Buddha taught what's called the middle way, although I don't think this is a very good term, because it seems to, in modern terms, it seems to assume there's some kind of compromise between the two. Rather than go for extremes, we go for some kind of nice, liberal, consensual compromise. It's not that at all. The middle way avoids both of these extremes, not by any kind of compromise, but by navigating through and beyond them. And the Buddha also says in verse 118, all that are proclaimed by them are the inexplicables. There were certain questions that the Buddha refused to answer. Traditionally, there were 10 of these questions, the 10 unanswerable questions, although this was later refined to 14. Again, there's a very good article on Wikipedia called The 14 Unanswerable Questions. And according to this article, the 14 questions imply two basic attitudes to the world, with the two basic views of existence and the view of non-existence. And the Buddha said that people are accustomed to think in these terms, and that as long as they remain entangled in these two views, they will not attain liberation. So the world is neither eternal nor finite. It's worth looking at this article, but I won't go into the details now, otherwise it will take too much time. There are questions to do with the nature of the world and the nature of the Buddha. So, if the world is neither finite nor eternal, then what is its nature? I said earlier on that liberation can be achieved by insight into the nature of the world, or insight into the nature of the self, the individual. How can this be done? Well, the answer is given in the next verse, which I think I'll have to leave until the next video.